She was not trying to attack the young woman. It was simply a doubt that arose in her mind. The topic of the advice was not something you could discuss with everyone. The lady-in-waiting pointed toward town. She said they would talk in the chapel. It was a place much like the building on Gyukyuan's premises, dedicated to a foreign religion. There were places within where one could have a private conversation, and the fortune-teller used them to ply her trade. These nooks and crannies were originally for monks of the foreign faith to listen to people, but with the appropriate donation, they might also be available for private personal conversations. The lady-in-waiting had tried not to be overly specific about her name and identity. However, an industrious snoop could find out whom they were talking to. This fortune-teller appeared to have taken advantage of that. I was the one who accepted the perfume, and I accepted the advice to tamper with the cage. It was all me. The lady-in-waiting let her head droop. She felt she couldn't let there be any more dead young women simply because they wouldn't listen to the fortune-teller. She looked up at Maomao pleadingly. However, Maomao was not the one who would hand down judgment. The fortune-teller had also told her whom to target. She was vague when it came to the names or characteristics of some of the marks, but there were others, like Li Shu's half-sister, whom the lady-in-waiting was told about in detail. She ultimately sold perfume to about 3 people. The guilt does not fall on this young woman alone. It was I who tampered with the cage. The bride's uncle said this as he stepped forward. He had found the lady-in-waiting in a somber mood and questioned her. Indeed, it seemed like more than one young woman could have managed it alone. It wasn't just them, the bride's father said. The staged suicide was my idea, even if it meant disturbing my niece's grave. No, brother, I begged you to do what you did. Witnessing this exchange, the women of the family began a terrible cry. So all of this came not from the fortune-teller, but was your own idea? Jinchi asked. That's right. After what happened yesterday, we did not have time to meet with the fortune-teller. Would this fortune-teller have been able to meet with you? Jinchi was watching the pitiful family closely. He did not seem to be thinking of how to punish them, but rather how to connect this to whatever came next. As he watched the family, Maomao silently watched him. They never did find the fortune-teller or whoever it was. A monk at the chapel testified to where the diviner had been living. It is said that money talks even in hell, and a good donation made the man quite forthcoming. The residence he pointed them to was totally empty. The only thing they could conclude from what they found there was that the fortune-teller didn't appear to live like someone from the West. Chapter 4, Homeward Bound. Maomao didn't know how Jinchi would deal with the bride and her family. After everything was over, he spent some time in conversation with Gyukyuan, but it was hardly a discussion Maomao could intrude upon. The only thing she could do was hope things wouldn't get worse. Consort Li Shu was no longer in confinement, but what to do about her half-sister was a separate matter. And so, on her 6th day in the western capital, with their departure looming the next day, all Maomao could think was, I never did get to do any sightseeing. That was it. It might sound cold, but Maomao wasn't one to dwell on negative thoughts. She had been hoping to go out and do something to refresh herself. However, she was told it was time to get ready to go home. She found herself in the cactus garden, and fatigue was visible on her face. She did not know if the plants would survive in the capital's climate, but she wanted to ask for some seeds or a small clipping to take with her. Gyukyuan went one step further, kindly calling the merchant for them, so she was grateful for that much. On that note, her stay in the western capital came to an end. Lahan asked, "What in the world is this?" They were in the carriage on their way home. He was pointing to a bird feather, sharpened and blackened at one end. He said that people in the West did not use brushes. Instead, they used metal pens or feathers like this one. Maomao tilted her head. I think they found it in that fortune-teller's house. There hadn't been many possessions, but this had been among the limited evidence they uncovered. The emperor's honored younger brother seemed quite interested in what kind of feather it was. Would you happen to know? It is very small. I do not think it belongs to a water bird, Lahan said. The feather was grey in colour and did not actually look very suited to being a writing instrument. It was probably a random feather someone had grabbed for a backup in case it was needed. At length Lahan said, "You do not think it might belong to a dove? How prosaic. Many people ate dove meat, and there was a custom of releasing the birds on celebratory occasions." Lahan looked a bit deflated. Perhaps he had been hoping for something a little more exotic. Maomao stared out the window. She said, "They told us we would be taking a boat home, right?" "That is right," Lahan replied. Beside him, Rikusen was smiling broadly. He was not obliged to attend either the wedding or the funeral. He had at least been able to tour around a little. He gave Maomao a piece of silk cloth he had gotten. She was happy enough to accept what she was given. However, something about it all felt a bit unfair to her, and she could not help giving him a modestly dirty look. "Why could you not have attended instead?" she muttered. "Oh, I would never have fit in at that household," he said. It sounded humble and he was smiling, but she had no idea whether he was telling the whole truth. Duo and consort Lishu were riding in a separate carriage. They would make the journey home together. There was certainly no sense in them staying in the western capital any longer. Lishu's father Aryuo had said he would bring Lishu home, but Duo had turned him down. To suddenly develop a soft spot for the daughter he had ignored for the last 15 years was, well, convenient to say the least. "We will have to change vessels a few times, but we should make it back in half the time it took to get here. The wind should be with us at this time of year," Lahan said. Ships had an advantage over carriages because they did not have to stop frequently to rest. However, going west meant travelling upriver, and with the wind against them, it would have taken a long time. But now they would be travelling down one of the tributaries of the great river. A boat would easily get them to the capital. Jinshi and Basin were still in the western capital. They had been unavoidably detained to conclude the business they had put off. By all rights, Maomao should have stayed with them. However, Lahan had asked Jinshi if he might borrow his little sister for a while. If she had been present, she might have objected. She could have said, "I am not your sister," or "Do not drag me into your twisted plans." But she had not been there, and the matter was decided without her input. From what she heard, Jinshi was almost going to refuse, but then he changed his mind and agreed. She hadn't had a proper opportunity to talk to him since the night of the banquet. Maomao admittedly felt awkward around him, and in her own way, was glad to be rescued from the situation. "As happy as I am to be going home early." She was also anxious. She considered whether she should sleep with Duo instead of near Lahan as she packed her clothing into a wrapping to use as a pillow. After all the work she had done to create a cozy sleeping place in the carriage, now she had to begin again. "How about some modesty, little sister?" Lahan said. "I don't know what you mean." Lahan and Rikusen exchanged a look, but Maomao didn't care. She closed her eyes and went to sleep. After 2 days in the carriage, they arrived at the landing. Maomao's slightly bad feeling became a very bad feeling. The river was narrow as they went upstream. The vessel awaiting them was less of a ship and more of a dinghy. They could not even fit everything on one boat. A second one floated there to hold their luggage. "Are we sure about this?" she asked. "I trust the business," Lahan replied. "I do not expect any trouble with theft. Not what I was asking. I know, do not say it." He wouldn't quite look at her. Evidently he had been picturing a bigger boat too. "Ah ha 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 ha, this is fun." The exclamation came from Duo, the only cheerful member of their party. The rest of them were too busy clinging to the dinghy to squeal or shout. The captain assured them the rapids only covered the first li or so. However, it seemed they would capsize before they got that far. Lishu was resting her head on Duo's knees. The relentless rolling and rocking of the boat during the first moments of the trip had been enough to make the timid young woman faint. She was secured with a rope to keep her from falling overboard. Perhaps she was the lucky one. "I didn't think it would shake so much," the tousled-haired man with the glasses said. His face was pale as he deposited bile into the frothing water. And he had been boasting about how quickly they would return home. Apparently he had forgotten the differences between travelling by land and travelling by ship. "Do not turn this way. You will spit that stuff on me. Maomao, give me something to settle my stomach." He reached toward her with a shivering hand, but she was not sure what to do. She had already given him an antiemetic, and he promptly threw it up. She could give him another one, but he would likely vomit that out as well. Rikusen was not as boisterous as Duo, but he seemed just as relaxed. He was watching the local fauna with a big smile on his face. "Look over there, Sir Lahan. You can see a little bird. I never get tired of the scenery here. It is always so lovely." That is just another way of saying the scenery never changes, Maomao thought. Su'eri looked a little ill, but she wasn't making as much noise as Lahan was. Not all of the bodyguards looked entirely comfortable, but they weren't going to allow themselves to act pathetic while on the job. Maomao was Maomao. A bottle of wine wouldn't leave her tipsy, and neither could a moving vehicle. She was not a confident swimmer, so she sat quietly to avoid falling overboard. Look at all of you, Lahan grumbled. Seeing him so out of sorts was in its own way a rare treat, and Maomao found herself quite amused. Once the tributary joined the main river, the stream grew wider and they changed to their next boat. Are you sure you don't have anything to stop me feeling so sick? Lahan asked. He was clinging to a bucket and his face was bloodless. He didn't seem much better despite being in a larger vessel, although he was throwing up less often. That was something at least. They were in a small cabin. The ship had only 2 such cabins, and this room was for the women of the party. They could not have our duo or consort Lishu sleeping side by side with everyone else after all. If Lahan had shown his face there, especially looking so bedraggled, it meant he could not take the seasickness anymore. Lishu eventually came to, but she was still resting on Ardu's lap. It was clear she was pretending to be seasick to get a little extra attention. The food you threw up earlier was all I had left, Maomao said. She had finally given him the medicine, but he threw it right back up. She hadn't even had time to feel the medicine work. She had brought the antiemetics because she knew carriages could be shaky. She never expected to need them for this reason. Ships did have the advantage of continuous movement, meaning you reached your destination sooner. However, that also meant the shaking never stopped. Maomao was a little surprised to realize that Lahan was so sensitive to the boat. He hadn't had a problem with the carriage. She understood, though. Maomao leaned along with a roll of the ship. Lahan exclaimed yikes and grabbed onto a post. His other hand still clutched his bucket. Next, Maomao leaned in the other direction. Why don't you get seasick? Lahan asked resentfully. Maybe it's the same reason I don't get drunk very easily. Incidentally, Lahan was not a man who could hold his liquor. He continued to glare at Maomao. She hadn't even turned green. I'm not riding on any more boats, he announced. He looked haggard, but the middle of a river journey was hardly the ideal place to find a good carriage. He ended up getting on the next ship as well. He also had to accompany Arduo and the consort on their journey home. Arduo seemed to really enjoy travelling by ship. Lishu enjoyed being doted on by Arduo. Neither of them wanted to switch to a carriage at this point. Eventually, they arrived at the 3rd boat landing. As Maomao was getting off the ship to board the next one, she heard a loud thump. What could it be? It turned out someone had collapsed right there on the dock. A sailor was trying to revive him, but he looked cautious while doing so. The limp figure was a man wearing a thoroughly weathered cloak. Is he sick? Maomao wondered, observing from a safe distance. She did not want to get sucked into anything, but she wasn't so cold-blooded that she would leave a sick or injured person without help. Hey mister, are you all right? The sailor said, giving the man a shake. I am just fine, the man said, although he sounded pretty out of it. The sailor turned him face up, then groaned. Ugh, the man must have been quite handsome once. The high, firm bridge of his nose and his willow branch eyebrows proved it. Half of his face was covered in pockmarks. If his face had been a circle, the pockmarked skin and the clear skin would have roughly formed a yin-yang shape. The sailor shoved the man away. The newcomer got unsteadily to his feet. Excuse me, sir. Could I hitch a ride on your boat? He smiled despite his hideous face. Maomao could see a pouch of small coins in his outstretched hand. He was still young, maybe in his mid-20s. Hold on, you, cried the sailor who had helped him up. You don't have some weird sickness, do you? He brushed furiously at anything that had come into contact with the man. Still smiling, the man touched his ravaged face. Oops, he nodded to himself as if everything made sense. A scarf lay on the ground at his feet. It must have fallen off when he collapsed. He picked it up and folded it in half, forming a triangle. Then he used it to cover half his face. At a glance, it almost looked like a bandage. I know, it's smallpox. That's what that is, isn't it? Smallpox was a terrible disease that covered the entire body in pustules. It was an extremely infectious illness and it was said could devastate an entire nation. Even a cough or a sneeze from someone sick could pass it to another person. The man gave a simple smile and scratched his cheek. "Ha, it is okay, these are just scars. I did have smallpox once, but now I am fit as a fiddle, just look. Like hell, you collapsed not 5 minutes ago. Stay back, I say. I only collapsed because I got a little hungry. You have to believe me." The conversation inspired everyone else near the man to give him a little extra room. Maomao narrowed her eyes. If he wasn't sick, then she wasn't needed here. "What seems to be the matter?" asked Rikusen. He had been transferring their luggage to the next boat and seemed very fastidious. Maomao privately decided to dub him Gaeshun too. "That man with the bandage on his face wants to board the ship, but the sailor won't let him," she explained briefly. Said Rikusen, studying the young man. His pockmarks were covered and he was truly handsome. He sounded quite light-hearted. "What is the problem? Is he trying to get a free ride?" "No, he has the money, but he has pockmarks on his face and the sailor is worried he might be sick." "But it doesn't matter since the ship is full already." Consort Lishu was on board, which meant there would be bodyguards. They couldn't allow just any stranger to get on board too. Rikusen squinted at the man. "Is he really sick?" "Good question. From this distance it was hard to be sure. But from what Maomao could see, the man had pockmarks but no pustules. He was probably telling the truth. He had been sick once, but it had been a long time ago. So why didn't Maomao simply say that to the sailor? "It's only going to be a headache for me getting involved." It was just that simple. The young man showed no sign of giving up on the boat. He practically clung to the sailor. "I'm begging you, let me on board. How can you be so cruel? Let go of me. Stop, I'll catch your pox." Usually handsome men with scars on their faces had a dark mood to match, but not this man. He clung to the sailor's bulky feet and wouldn't let go. The other sailors wanted to help their shipmate, but they were frightened of catching some awful disease. They stood helplessly at a distance. Something had to be done about this man, or the ship was never going to leave. Rikusen must have guessed what Maomao was thinking from her expression, because he grinned. "I wish the ship would hurry up and go, don't you?" She did not say anything. Was he trying to tell her to do something about it? Looking thoroughly put upon, Maomao got off the boat and went over to the sailor, who by now looked deeply troubled, and the young man, who by now had snot coming out of his nose. "Pardon me," she said. "Yes," the young man replied. She did not have his full permission, but she took the scarf from Snot Man's face. Looking at the ugly marks, she knew he had gotten them years before. She looked at the eye on the side of his face that was covered in pockmarks. It seemed hazy and not quite focused. His pupils were different sizes. It seemed he was blind in one eye. "This person is not sick," she announced. "He has scars, but he won't spread the disease to anyone else. It wasn't smallpox anyway. She didn't know about other diseases he might have, and she accepted no responsibility for them." The sailor looked at the man with total revulsion. He then carefully picked up the coin purse the man had dropped. He turned the container upside down and small change tumbled out with a musical sound. "And where are you going, sir?" "To the capital. I want to go to the capital." "The capital?" He clenched his hands into fists and shook them with excitement. He could not have seemed more like a country bumpkin headed for the big city if he had tried. "And once I'm there, I'm going to make so many medicines." "Medicines?" Maomao's ears perked up. "Yeah, I may not look like much, but I am kind of a big deal." The man pulled a large bag from somewhere under his cape. When he opened it, a distinctive odor wafted out. Maomao took the clay pot from the bag and opened the lid. Inside, she found it was full of ointment. She did not know if it was effective. However, it had been made very carefully, with thoroughly powdered medicinal herbs blended to the perfect consistency. Such care in preparation was even more vital to the quality of the final product than the specific herbs used. Maomao looked at the man again. He was grinning widely and said to the sailor, "Do you want some? It works on seasickness." But of course, no sailor would buy a medicine like that. He said tightwad. "Why not just buy some?" "Oh, actually forget about buying anything. Can I get on the boat?" "Yes, the boat." "No, this ship is rented out. You will have to wait for the next one." "What? Seriously, I have to wait?" The man looked less than thrilled, but he seemed to accept it. Then he looked at Maomao and grinned again. "Thanks, you were a big help. To show my gratitude, let me give you some of this seasickness medicine." The way he talked made him sound very young, but he seemed more grown up than he acted. He seemed at least older than Maomao. No thanks, I don't get seasick, Maomao said. No, that's a shame. The man was about to put the medicine away when someone bellowed from behind. Maomao, hold it. Lahan came flying off the ship. The medicine. Give it to me, he said, breathing hard. Maomao was impressed he was able to hear them. He had been quite a ways away and did not look his best. Maomao entertained herself with such thoughts as she got on the boat. Phew, you really saved my neck. Not only did you explain about my illness, you even got me onto this boat. The man with the bandage turned out to be named Kokyu. He was a traveller, something Maomao might have guessed from his grimy clothing. He was also a doctor, or so he said. When Lahan learned that Kokyu had many kinds of medicine with him, he became very insistent that the traveller join them on their ship.